Speaking of CEOs, let me ask you a couple of tips there. Um, what would you say to somebody, 2 or 3 quick tips on how to get there? In other words, they're a director or they're a VP and they really want to be a CEO someday. So a couple of tips on how to get there, and then 2 or 3 tips on first 90 days as a CEO, first time CEO. 2-part question there. How to get there, and then first 90 days. Go for it.
All right. I'd say the first tip is to have a clear personal mission statement. Have a goal. You can say, so my goal was to be the CEO of a venture-backed company in Boulder, Colorado.
Seriously. Now, seriously, I want to pause you right there. You actually, that was a goal you had written down. That was a specific goal.
Well, if I didn't write it down, I said it a lot to myself.
Okay.
I'm driving out to Colorado in my FJ40 with no radio. I actually had AM radio. So I listen, this is before talk radio. It was just, oldies, cool, country, and baseball, right? And so,
cool.
But I wanted to be the CEO of a venture-backed company in Boulder, Colorado. And so I'm living in Williamsburg, and I've got an education and no work history other than teaching tennis, more or less. And so it's like, how am I going to do this? I'm going to move to Colorado. Step one, move to Boulder. Right. Step two, find some kind of housing you can afford. Right. Right. But step three, get involved in venture. Right. So there's some ways, but so the first step is to have a personal mission statement. The second, more tactical advice might be dangerous in 2 of the 3 disciplines. So the 3 disciplines are product, sales, go-to-marketing stuff, and finance operations. And so as an accounting CFO type, I started off on the finance operations leg of the stool. That was my first big break, was to be the CFO at a 4-person company. That's when we grew up to be part of Oracle. But I went from CFO and then being public about your goal. So I would tell people, I want to be the CEO of a venture-backed company in Boulder, Colorado. And so the CEO of the company I was at knew that, right? So I would talk about it, when you have beer and stuff. I want to be a CEO someday. And so he knew that, and he knew this, you want to be dangerous in 2 of the 3 disciplines. I'm not really a product guy. And so I'm more of a sales and marketing person, because I think a good CFO knows how to sell stock. That's raising money. And so in our little business, I had done everything other than build the product and sell it. I hired everybody. And unfortunately, our VP of sales got an infection in his brain and became like clinically paranoid and was committed to a hospital. Against his will by his family. And so we had this crisis in our sales team where our leader just got taken out. We had sales reps, but we had no leader. And so the CEO said, you want a shot at VP of sales? I'm like, hell yeah. And I'd never had a quota in my life. And now I'm running a sales team. And I completely stepped away from finance. We backfilled my role. And if I was not successful as VP of sales, there was no going back, right? You're out of the company. And so I had to, I own the number. And I learned a couple of things. One is the VP of sales makes a hell of a lot more money than the CFO, and a lot less. It's about a 4-to-1 ratio, right? I worked half as much and made twice as much money, right? So it's like 4 times better off. And that's why I ended up starting a company with my free time and extra money. So, but second tip, right? Be dangerous in those 2 out of 3. And the third tip for how to become a CEO is hang around people who hire CEOs.
Right.
All right. So how do you do that? Who hires CEOs? Boards of directors. VCs on those boards, right? They're the ones who are, especially here it is in October of 2020. And this is the season where boards and venture capitalists are thinking, how's our year going? Are we going to make our year or miss our year? We're going to miss. How much? Probably by, a third, like a lot of companies do. Okay, we got some plans for 2021. Is this the right team to go do those plans? Or are we going to make a change in the team and have a new team for 2021 and beyond? And so, being plugged into that network. And how do you do that? Anyone can do it. And all you need to do is some fundamental things. You need to show up and be helpful. And so when I was 26 and I had an education, the people at Rocky's Venture Club found me and said, come here, right? And I had time. And so I could be on the membership committee. I would call all the first-time attendees. If you didn't renew, I would call you. I was on the sponsorship committee. So I'd call all the lawyers and accountants and say, let's go to lunch at some fancy Denver restaurant and say, are you going to re-up? And they'd say, well, tell me about your programs. And I'm like, this is what we're doing. We put butts in seats. So like, sure, they'll write that check for $2,500 or $5,000 if you deliver good programs. So I was on the programs committee. What would I do on programs committee? I would call all the VCs and say, hey, I'm Jim with Rockies. Would you come speak on our panel about how to raise money in these times? And I swear it was just like running a running magazine. is being a lifelong runner, you get Runner's World every year. It's the same content, how to run your fastest 5K, do your first marathon, recover from injuries, right? Like how to lose weight over the holidays. It's just a shoe review, right? And so being part of Rockies for 20 years, right? It's just like, what's the role of bankers? What's the role of vendors? How do you deal with co-founder conflict? Just all this stuff. And so I could call every financing person in town, every investor, and say, would you help? And to a person over that whole time, they always said yes.
Yep.
If you
want to help, I agree.
And if they can't make the date, they would help you find somebody. Well, I can't make it, but my partner can. And so I got to be known by these people. I would go to venture capital in the Rockies. I probably went for 19 straight years. And I would pay the $1,000 out of pocket for that ticket, which was expensive, to go up to Beaver Creek, or it used to be in Denver, and you just hang out. And that was like a gathering of the faithful. And sometimes I was a CEO of a company and I was pitching something, but other times I would just show up and hear the other pitches and go to the happy hours that Cooley and SVB and Square One and all those people would sponsor, because they just recognize you as part of the ecosystem. And so when, years later, right, Brad Fell's thinking, geez, SendGrid needs a CEO. Well, guy Franklin's not doing anything.
That's how it happens.
Let's get it back for it.
I mean, I just want to pause right there for the listeners. That is so critical. I mean, that's exactly how it happens. If you show up, if you're helpful, if you network, if you hang around the right people at the right time, and you tell people what you want, magical things can happen. And that's what you just described. And that's exactly what happened. Brad thought of you because you were there. You had been having conversations. He knew you were available. Yeah. So often as a recruiting firm, we will get, executives call us and say, please help me. I'm looking for a job. And so I checked their LinkedIn. They got like 150 connections and they haven't been active for 2 years. They haven't gone to any meetings. They haven't gone to any coffees. They haven't networked at all. And they're calling me saying, oh my gosh, I can't find anything. And my first point is, well, okay, let's start with how you're handling your networking.
I actually come up with a job search process. So you've told the nice version of my career, right? There's always the backstory, right? And so for you listeners, right, every time you see some press release or whatever, like, just believe me, there's always a backstory. And
yes.
So I got hired as that VP of sales once I made the transition because I was actually offered the CEO job, but I didn't commit to stay for a year because I wanted to start my own company. And I'd started a startup on the side, and I wanted to rather be a venture-backed founder than a CEO at that point. I'd been at the company for 4 or 5 years. I wanted, I want to do something different. And so I ended up becoming a founder. All right. So I raised $5 million. I'm a backed founder by Sequel Ventures, which was the big fund in town before, Foundry was, and Sequel was like my dream firm to be part of. And that was awesome. Except a year later, we were out of money, couldn't raise a B, and, parked it at zero. And so we lost all of their money, $5.25 million. And I felt very bad about that. And I was ready to, this was down in Lodo, and I was ready to just come back to Boulder and go find a job as a CFO and pay my bills. And the guys at Sequel said, well, we just gave $2.5 million to a security startup down in the tech center. Why don't you go down there and do your thing down there? And I said, well, I need a job. So, okay, what's my thing? They said, spreadsheets and the people stuff. I'm like, okay. So I went down there and I was the CFO at a security startup that didn't have a CEO, and that was an issue. But we ended up raising more money. We raised $5 million from Sigma Partners out of Boston on September 10th of 2001, the day before 9/11. And the business had 2 weeks of cash left. I was going to park it on September 30th, just like I did my own startup, and go back to Boulder and be like, all right, I spent the summer here helping you people trying to raise money. If it didn't work, it didn't work. But oh my God, it worked. And we got the money in right before the world stopped. And ended up staying there 2 years before I got fired again. Because part of bringing in the money was we had to hire a CEO. And so we did a search and hired a recruiter, and we brought in a CEO, Terry LaRue. And Terry's a good guy. He's made money for people, but he had his own CFO that he'd worked with for 10 years. He was his own guy.
It happens.
So 2 years, he comes to me and says, you're kind of done. I'm bringing in Connell, see you later, bye. And I was like, oh, man.
It happens.
So,
it happens.
Yeah, so I'm looking for a job that summer, and I'm like, well, how do I find a job where I don't keep getting fired? And so that's where the 4-H values system came from, which is something it's probably my most proud professional achievement, is honest, hungry, humble, happy. So that summer I was thinking about, like, where did Terry and I have conflict, right? It's like Terry liked to play things close to the vest. He saw himself as like an orchestra conductor. As long as each department played their part, then there would be beautiful music. I had a completely different approach. I played things wide open. I would tell people what our burn rate was, how much cash we had, and those sorts. I would tell the board what's happening real time. I was on the Sequel Ventures triathlon team, so I was very close with Sequel, and Sequel was the investors. And so, I was the CFO, but then there was Terry, and so they had backed me, and so I was very close to them, and so I would just tell them in real time what was happening. And Terry, that was not his communication style. I'd say like a savvy CEO, he knew how to manage the information flow to a board. Which you got to be careful of. So now when I'm a board member, I require direct access, not only to the CFO, but to any VP.
Good point.
So there's a tip for a board member, right, is you should require direct access to management members and use it. You meet with them one-on-one separately from the CEO. Not that CEOs are bad, but it's just just like when you're a CEO, you should have skip level meetings. So part of my process would be on Thursdays, I would go to the Cheesecake Factory with employees, people who actually do frontline work.
Oh, good.
Someone who builds something, someone who sells something, and someone who does a support function. And you learn so much in those lunches about what's happening, because your management team are, all good-hearted people trying to do the right thing, but it's just human tendency, to filter.
That's right.
And information keeps getting, rosier as it goes up the chain. So,
that's right.
you're like, man, this is a great business.
So it does. It goes through all those filters before it gets to the CEO desk. Yeah. How about a couple of other tips for a first time? That's a good one, by the way. How about a couple of others? First time CEO, or maybe first 90 days or 6 months. Anything you want to share with them?
Yeah. First time CEO. There's so much.
I know we could do a 2-hour podcast on just that topic.
Here's the big thing: is don't parachute in. So your job as the CEO is to create a team and get results to others. So they should do it. So if sales is failing, don't go in and close that big deal. Because what you're doing is you're putting a Band-Aid on it. You're not letting the organization feel the pain of not having the right sales leader. If your product's slipping and you're an engineering person, if you go in and fix the product, that's bad, right? Because your job is not to go fix the product and meet that deadline. That's the VP engineering's job, or the product people's job. It's like your job is to make sure you have the right leadership team. And so you don't have that team, then that's sort of on you. I was part of a lot of CEO groups as having lots of venture capital. So every time you raise venture capital, you get plugged into a CEO group of all the CEOs backed by that. And so one of these CEO groups, one guy bragged, like, my engineering team wasn't getting it done. I stayed all weekend. I got all done. He basically said, I showed them motherfuckers how to do it. Like, I'm a great CEO. And I'm just sitting there thinking, what a bonehead, right? It's like, you're just telling me you're like the worst CEO, right? Because you can't hire a good engineering team who delivers on their commitments, and you have to go in and be the hero, right? So watch out for that hero. So don't parachute in. Probably the other thing is that as the CEO, as you go up the organization, your voice gets longer and louder, and every time you speak, it's policy. So you should be looking the farthest out, 1 to 3, 5 years out. If you're a VP, like a CFO or something, you're probably thinking about the quarter, VP of sales, the quarter, maybe the month as you go down. If you're a rep, right, you're thinking about, I need to do my daily call volume, or I need to hit my weekly number, or something like that. And so your time horizon goes up, your voice is louder, and you set policy when you speak. So at SendGrid, we had a business office in Boulder, basically, and we had an engineering office in California. And so I'm a business person. So I would fly to California, I'd hang out with the engineering people. And I don't know anything about engineering. And so they'd ask me some questions. I'd say some stuff, not realizing I was impacting what they were going to do. And so I'd come back to Boulder, and then word would get back to me like, Jim, when you go to California, all you can talk about are weather and sports, right? You cannot talk about, because they think you're changing the direction. And of course, we have a product marketing team, product management team, and they're doing backlog grooming sessions and they're setting priorities. And you're going to just create a lot of chaos because you are shifting things. And if you're a founder, same thing. Isaac, it's like he was not in sort of production engineering. He was like an R&D. So he could be in a low structure environment, which is where he was successful. But a high structure environment where you're accountable for budgets and deadlines and all that stuff, like that is not his world. That's where you need to have that production engineering team. And the CEO, you can't be saying things and disrupting people. I'm going to close with a story. The CEO tip is, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and just get used to it, right? If it's wrong, it's on you. If it goes well, it's on them. And I used to like to go to marketing meetings and we talk about price. This was at the math software company, because every company struggles with price. It's just a hard issue, right? And if you're not struggling, you should think about it more. It's just a tough thing. What is your pricing metric? What should you charge for, et cetera?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go to a marketing meeting, we talk about price, and I would say something like, well, maybe this or maybe that. And what would happen, right? People would pick up their pens, write it down, and stop talking. And I'd be like, no. I just want to participate as an equal as we're trying to wrestle with this tough question of like, how should we structure pricing? But as a CEO, when you say stuff, it just, even with your best intentions and all the warnings, it just stops the conversation. So
I couldn't agree more.
Marketing meetings, and then people are like, Jim doesn't care.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, kind of a summary of what you're saying, I think, is, correct me if I'm wrong, I say it this way, when I'm giving CEO advice, I ran a couple of $40 million companies as a CEO, not quite as big as your stuff, but my biggest advice is, listen, as a first-time CEO, learn how to listen more and talk a little bit less and ask a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions, listen more, because you're right. Every single word that comes out of your mouth can spin somebody in a direction. And if you didn't follow the chain of command, or you can make it messy. That's what CEOs don't realize. First-time CEOs don't understand that as they maneuver through the office and have conversations, they're really creating these little mini storms.
There's like a boat going through, creating a wake.
Yeah, so true.
Some other quick tips, and on the top of my fingers, is have an office of CEO. It's not written down anywhere. But if you get a decent sized company, you'll end up having maybe 7 or 8 direct reports, some founders and functional leads. But they're, sort of designate 2 people who are, first among equals. For me, I had a general counsel and sort of like a VP finance operations person. And the 3 of us kind of worked like a triumvirate, like in Roman times, right? You have sort of 3 people. And I found that was a good sounding board. So when you're thinking about your annual planning, or should we sell the company, or should we raise money from Byron, or whatever, it's like, they're the first 2 people you go to and say, what do you think? Am I crazy? What are the trade-offs? And then you take it to the broader management team, and then to the board, et cetera. So having that office of CEO is important. I think also over communicating. You should feel like a politician. You should have a few key points about what you're doing. At SendGrid, we had the blue t-shirts with the white lettering, SEND grid. Well, the send was actually part of our strategy, which is scaling everywhere with innovation and double-digit growth, SEND. And so every employee knew that we're all about scaling everywhere geographically with innovation and double-digit monthly growth. And so that was a mantra we would just sort of beat into people's heads, as long as the 4 H's, the honest, hungry, humble, happy. And so you should over communicate so much, because
totally agree.
People struggle with that. I love it when marketing is trying to communicate to sales, some point about, competitive battle card or something. And some sales rep's like, shit, I don't know how to handle this objection. Marketing's like, I've told you that 6 times. I said, well, so marketing. Here's the key to communicating with sales. Have you done it 3 times with food?
If you think today's tip or guest interview can help someone you know, please share this with them. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to hit that little bell next to the subscribe button so you can be notified when we release a new episode. Our show features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviews. You can visit Riderflex.com to learn more about us and get information on the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.